right here in this edition on page 90, second paragraph, with the words, and as has been said. Does anyone want to read?
I'll read.
Please, Robin, go for it.
And has been said precisely because there is such voluminous, and frequent use of symbolic structures and models, most of them connected with external forms, it is necessary to be extremely cautious about any attempt to give a concrete physical interpretation to highest essences.
Right. Just continue a little bit more. The next idea connects, and then we'll elaborate on it. Go for it.
From all of which it may be understood why, in actual fact, there is no Jewish iconography to speak of. True, in the Holy Temple, there were a few symbolic elements, not images of the Holy One. Blessed be he, but of the cherubim who bear the chariot.
Right.
Even these symbols were hidden away in the inner recesses of the temple, so that they should not become part of the ritual. For it has often happened in history that things once having no more than a symbolic or reminiscence value have been turned into ritual objects or idol worship. That is why throughout the generations, Jewish tradition has stringently resisted anything like defined iconographic imagery.
Right. And this goes, this has maybe two different facets. There's the halachic facet, and of course there's the Kabbalistic facet that we're speaking about. The halachic facet, which the Jewish law facet, is that one should not have imagery especially in sanctuaries or in synagogues and in places where we pray, lest people think that when we are bowing down to that imagery and transforming them into idols. So say we had the image of a man or a woman in the sanctuary, people who would not know anything about Jewish worship, if they would come and visit the sanctuary and then bow and see us bowing down, we might think we're bowing down to God, but they will think that because there's a man and a woman in the sanctuary, we're actually bowing down to them and turning them into idols. So there's a legal aspect, there's a legal facet to it, a Jewish halachic aspect to the idea of not creating any imagery in our world, and especially in the sanctuaries and places in which we pray and worship. But there's a Kabbalistic, and this is really what Rabbi Steinsaltz is speaking about here, there's a Kabbalistic idea, and that is that really God is limitless. God is so limitless that nothing in this world can truly define him. Now, by the way, this is true not just for the God out there. This is also true for the God in here. In here, we have a God that's also limitless. That's why we really believe that the divine soul is limitless. And we never know, but one little action can transform the world. And we've seen that in history happen time and time again. People who we thought were as insignificant as possible created an invention that changed the world. Or, you know, it's interesting, the big revolutions of the past decade, dare I say, were started by just a few people. One may even say that the terrible, terrible, terrible riots that are happening now were started by one man, George Floyd. And not the violent riots, I'm talking about the peaceful riots. The violent riots that are not connected to George Floyd because they are not connected to anything good under the sun. But peaceful riots, this desire now, this awakened desire to change the facet of our world, again, was started by one person. I'm not here to speak, God forbid, about worldly events. I'm here to speak about Kabbalah, but it comes to emphasize this point, that because we are indeed limitless inside here, since we possess that divine soul, so too our actions. We never know which action can create that has that limitless power, that can create that limitless impact on our world. And because of that, again, going back to this idea that Rabbi Steinsaltz is presenting, we dare not limit those limitless powers or that limitless soul into any type of image, any type of definition, any type of picture, of idol, as he speaks about here, because again, it will be doing a disservice to God, and it will be in a way opposing the very infinity that he is and that he stands for, that God stands for. Now, I think by the way, this is a revolutionary idea. Just think about it, and then we'll go back to God himself. But just think about this. Just imagine. And I think, again, this is connected also to the worldly events right now that we're experiencing. Just imagine that we would see each other as limitless individuals with limitless potentials. The world would be different. If I would treat someone not by the way I see him, but by the way he truly is, by the infinity that he truly has, the world would be different. Fortunately, we live in a world where we only see bodies, but we don't see souls. We don't see that infinite potential. But just imagine we would actually start living in a world where we can see that infinite potential in everyone. The world will be different. So this idea in of itself is, as mentioned, really revolutionary. But then we come to God and how God communicates to this world, and how God, in a way, yes, has to condense himself to be in this world. And that's the idea of Tzimtzum that we spoke about in the past, where the light of God has to condense itself narrowly so that it can allow this world that seems to be materialistic and physical to exist. Otherwise, with the light of God as it is at its core, this world would never be able to exist. It's almost like, and we've given this example in the past, it's like electricity, right? If we take the power station and put in a light bulb at home, the light bulb in the whole home would explode. So the electricity has to be condensed until it can fit into that 60 watt or 100 watt or whatever it may be of that light bulb to illuminate the way it's supposed to illuminate. But essentially it's connected to the power station. It's all one. That light is essentially all one, comes from the same place. Same year, God had to condense himself. This idea of Tzimtzum had to condense himself in order to fit in this world, so to speak. But on the other hand, it's the same God. Not that God changed himself. It's the exact same God, just like that electricity and light bulb is the same electricity and the power station. It stems from there. Same year. God, it is the same God. So on the one hand, we have this God that limits himself to be in this world and to allow the world to exist. But on the other hand, we cannot also allow this material world, this physicality around us to cheat us, to cheat our mind, so to speak, in thinking that, oh, that God is also therefore limited. No. There's a spark of God in everything that is as limitless as it is in its source. Just as that electricity is as limitless as it is in a power station. The fact that we're only seeing the material and the physical world is not a reflection of the way God is in this world. Not at all. It's a reflection of how the world is and how God wants the world to be in this world. Limited, defined, and with borders and boundaries. But in essence, at its very core, in its soul, the world is limitless. And therefore, yes, we may want to draw images because we think that this is the world we live in. It's limited, it has definitions, it has specific sizes and volumes and so on. But no, we cannot forget the idea that God is limitless. The God in this world is also limitless. And therefore, no images and no idols and no imagery or any type of definition is allowed because, again, of this idea. Now, I just want to add one thing. And again, I want this to be much more of a dialogue than anything else. But it's interesting to note that, when we speak about God is in everything, there's a great, I don't know if I've shared this story before, but there's a great story that's found in the diary of the previous Lubavitcher Rebbe, Rabbi Yosef Yitzchak Schneerson, about how when he was a child, he was walking in the park with his father, who was a Hasidic Rebbe too, the Rebbe Rashab, Rabbi Shalom Ber. And as a young child, he, without even noticing, he was walking with his father and he tore a leaf off a tree. And his father stopped him and he said to him, Yosef Yitzchak, you should know that even leaves have souls. So you can't just tear off a leaf off a tree. That leaf also has a soul. By the way, Rabbi Yosef Yitzchak writes also in his diary much later on when he shared the story, that this is one of the most powerful teachings that he had heard in his life, that he had received from his father. That every leaf, every little thing has a soul in it. So I'm reminded of this idea because of the point I want to make here, and that is that when we face images of life in general, and I think that's why this idea exists, we really have a choice to make. We can define what we're seeing by the image that it carries, by the face that it wears, or we can by the leaf that it seems to be, so to speak, to use that story, or we can define the thing that we're seeing by the soul that it possesses, by the limitless power. When halacha tells us, do not create an image for God, or do not create an image for anything divine in this world, what it is saying is choose option number 2. Choose to see this world as souls, as particles that carry divinity, not just as it appears. That's the choice you should be making. And in a way, I think the world would be different. We spoke about this a little bit in the previous class now, but I think that again, if we were to relate to each other in such a way and to the world in such a way, imagine even to a fly. I've been now with this time that we have. We can do so much with it. It's just amazing. But I've been spending it by watching videos of the Lubavitcher Rebbe, of Rabbi Schneerson, who taught so much wisdom and so much divinity in his talks. But I paid attention not so much to his words the other day, but to a gesture of his. It's just amazing to see. I'm happy to share this video if we can find it also. But in one of his talks, all of a sudden there's a fly that's buzzing. Now, I don't know about you, but if a fly is buzzing now, say when I talk, I'll try to dismiss it. I'll try to patch it, as I would say in Yiddish. But the Lubavitcher Rebbe, it's just a beautiful thing. Beyond these words, beyond these wisdom, beyond these light, you just see how the Rebbe goes like this, like a very slow. Now when you see him clapping hands, you see the strength he had. It's not that he was a frail and weak man. He was a very robust man full of life. But he knew how to deal with God's creature, a fly, in a very gentle way. Why? Because he knew what we're speaking about. That even flies have souls. Even leaves have souls. Even the most minute creature has that infinite potential. And dare we not dismiss it just because of the way it looks. I'll just share with you, speaking about flies, but it's that interesting story that in the Talmud, the one who was responsible for the destruction of the second temple was Titus, as they call him in Hebrew, Titus, that Roman emperor who was as vicious as it gets. There's stories about how he would torture people, and I'm not even going to go there. But the Talmud says about how when he came back with the vessels of the temple to Rome, after the destruction, after he created havoc and annihilation of the Jewish state in Israel, he was coming back victorious to Rome as this great emperor who was able to conquer one of the toughest places to conquer, and the Holy Land out of all places. And he goes and he's sailing in his ship, again with the vessels. That's why many think that the vessels of the Second Temple might be at the Vatican. Whether that's true or not true, I have no clue. But that's what many people say, because of this passage from the Talmud that says that he was sailing with all these vessels, with all these treasures from Jerusalem. But in any case, as he's sailing in his ship on his way back to Rome, there's a terrible storm. So the Talmud says how Titus felt that, okay, now God was taking his revenge. So he turns to God and says, God, you the God of Israel that's only good at sea. You drowned the Egyptians at sea. You sent a flood to Noah's generation. Again, speaking of these waters, you can only conquer me at sea. You can't conquer me on land. On land, I just beat you in Jerusalem. And God says, you evil man. This is what the Talmud says. You think I can only conquer you at sea? I'll show you how the smallest, the tiniest of my creatures can conquer you. At that moment, I think a gnat or fly entered the nostrils of Titus. And he had terrible headaches from this fly that was now existing in his brains. When he reached Rome, he asked someone to do something about it. No one could help him. Finally, one day there was a carpenter was beating his hammer next to his place, and the fly stopped buzzing because of the hammer. So Titus said to the carpenter, yeah, I'm hiring you to hit the hammer each and every day by my place so that I can have some moments of serenity. But then the fly got used to the noise and it started buzzing again. Finally, when Titus died, the doctors wanted to see what was it that he was complaining about. We never heard of such a medical condition. So they split his brain open, examined him. And they found that the gnat had grown, according to the Talmud, to the size of a dove. That's how big it had become. But why am I telling you the story? Not just because it's a nice story from the Talmud, because it shares again this message that God was telling Titus, hey, you're this evil man that thinks that God does not exist in this world, that God does not exist on land, that you can just go and vilify everything that is holy under the sun. Well, I'm going to show you how there is a God even in the tiniest of creature. That God will be my messenger to teach you exactly that lesson. And God decides to send him even that gnat, filled with a divine mission to go and accomplish that which God wanted him to accomplish. But again, you see, if a gnat has a divine mission like that, then certainly every human being has a divine mission like that. And how dare we define any type of divinity with the images that we see, with the idols that we wish to make of them, with the definitions that we wish to give them. This is what this is saying. I'd love to hear your comments. I feel like I'm just speaking here, but please, Gila.
Yeah, so two quick things come to mind. Last night, I heard Avraham Fried sing a song I'd never heard him sing before.
Yeah.
And it's called My Little Leaf, Ayal Shali.
Mm-hmm.
And I couldn't believe it. For those of you that may have heard or know Avraham Fried, he was with us on a Zoom.
That's right. A
He's
very special man, yeah.
Phenomenal neshama and musician. And he sang this beautiful love song, My Little Leaf.
Yeah.
Have you heard it, Rabbi Allouche?
Yes.
You know the song. It's an incredible song. Just gorgeous. If anyone wants to know more about it, we can retranslate it for you. It's incredible. And the other thing that's always struck me is that when you see a creature like an insect and you approach it and you watch its life force and you see its fear, whatever that manifestation is, it runs, it moves away. It doesn't want to be destroyed.
Right.
You know, every creature, right, that Hashem has pretty much, I don't know of any that don't want to save their lives. So, but this tiny little ant knows we're there and it runs. And
right.
I've always been struck by the magnitude of the brilliance of this little creature. So it may be instinct, we can call it many things. It's the soul that Hashem put into it, I think.
Right. Beautiful. You know, there's you remind me of the story of King David. That story is found in the Talmud too, but the story of him running away from his enemies. And he hid in a cave. And his enemies were able to locate him in that cave. But when they entered the cave, they saw a spider web. And they said to themselves, there's no way that King David could have entered this cave now to flee, because it takes time for a spider to make a spider web. So he's certainly not here. Let's not waste our time and go to a different cave. Yet he was in that cave. Now, why did God create this miracle of the spider making a spider web and making the enemies go a different direction? Because King David had asked God, show me, why do I need spiders in the world? And when King David was saved by a spider, then he understood. See, you're right. Every creature has its own little soul and mission. And we dare not dismiss even the smallest one. You know, in addition to flies and insects, the Talmud says, and the Zohar speaks about this a lot, that God is so involved in this world, and that there's, again, a piece of him in everything in this world, that he is even found in blades of grass. And then the Talmud says that there is not one blade of grass in this world that does not have an angel over it, tapping it and saying to it, grow, grow. Every blade of grass has a little angel saying, grow, grow. Blade of grass, imagine. We'll walk on grass differently when we think of that.
Rabbi?
Yes.
It's Linda.
Oh, hi, Linda. Yes, I
Hi.
can see. Yes.
I was
How are
just
you?
wanted to mention Robert Frost, who's one of my favorite poets.
Yeah.
He said, and I've never forgotten it, he said, it was no dust speck, but unmistakably a living mite. With inclination, it could call its own. Plenty of intelligence. No one can know how glad I am to find on any sheet the least display of mind. And he was talking about a little tiny bug on a white sheet of paper.
Oh.
And so, you know, a lot of poets and philosophers over many generations have seen the small amount of intelligence in every living thing.
Right. Beautiful.
Right.
I know we have to go on, but can I share something?
Please. No,
God,
yeah.
I have so much to say.
Please.
I don't know. I feel like, okay.
Yeah.
First of all, that years ago when I was restudying for a test that I was really very upset about, just, praying about and thinking. I was living in Hawaii at the time, and I was in a hotel and I was sleeping and I was praying for guidance. I was praying to know that I could handle what is being put before me. And I woke up, this is true, I woke up and the entire bed was filled with ants. Ants, little ants everywhere. And I had my notes out and they were all over the place. And I went, what is this? What is this? And then I went, okay, what do you have to teach me? Okay, what do you have to teach me? And it just dawned on me. It was so fast because an ant can hold more than 100 pounds of its own weight. I mean, it is so strong. It could move mountains practically. It moves everything. And immediately I got the teaching. Thank you. I just want to thank you. You're my little teachers because you're telling me I can handle this. There's nothing that I can't handle. And I am telling you the truth. Within a few seconds, within a few minutes, they kind of went away. This is a true story. Right. So that's just one, but there's many. So I'm very inspired by this.
Beautiful.
And also by your quote about God bend down and listen to the blade of grass grow.
Right.
So
no, thank you. It's not mine. It's the Talmud's. Yeah, you're right.
Yeah, the Talmud. Yeah.
Thank you. Yeah. Yes, Barry.
So I'm interested in terms of the fact that my memory is correct, the cherubim in the temple, I think this is correct, when there was, I think, the presence of God in the temple, they would turn and face each other and vice versa when he wasn't there. And that's if correct. That's correct, then that's kind of suggests to me that there needs to be a manifestation, a symbolic manifestation for us, however, not for us as a collective group. Am I thinking incorrectly? There must be a reason why they would move and why they would designate a difference.
Right. So you're right, exactly. And so the reason, so you're right. In the Talmud, on the cover of the ark, really, was the cherubim, as he calls them here. Now, you're right, that when God was, so to speak, happy with the Jewish people, satisfied with their state, then they would be facing each other. If not, they would be facing opposite one another. The task, by the way, one of the tasks of the high priest, who would enter the Holy of Holies, where the ark and the cherubim were, only once a year on the holiest day, on Yom Kippur, one of his tasks was to go and see whether they were indeed facing each other or not. Because if they were not facing each other, then he would have to leave the Holy of Holies and tell the Jewish people, God hasn't accepted your prayer yet. You have to repent even more. Then he would go back and then see, watch again, see if they are indeed connected, facing each other or not. But he would have to do that multiple times if that was the case. Now, what's interesting is that to add to this, when Titus, we spoke about Titus, but when Titus came and destroyed the temple, and he went into the Holy of Holies, those faces were facing each other. Now, it's quite illogical if you think about this, because this is a time where God is pouring his wrath on the Jewish people, destroying the temple. And you are telling me that this is a time where he's essentially happy that the faces are facing each other, representing God's satisfaction with the Jewish people. That doesn't fit with the whole scene of the destruction. But the answer, according to Kabbalah, and Kabbalah speaks about this a lot, is that no, sometimes God's love is expressed with kindness, and sometimes it's expressed with justice, with gvura. The destruction in and of itself might be a very negative event, but it in essence is God's discipline of the Jewish people, so to speak, that will only lead thereafter to an even greater revelation, to the third temple. That's why Rabbi Akiva was the only sage who, seeing the foxes coming out of the Holy Temple and this destroyed area that was once the glory of the Jewish people, laughed. That's, the famous story of Rabbi Akiva walking with his peers, and he laughed at that scene. And his peers asked him, how dare you laugh? This scene was full of holiness and full of glory, and now it lies destroyed, and you laugh? He says, no, I laugh because I know what's coming. I'm not paraphrasing exactly, but I'm not quoting verbatim exactly, but again, I know what's coming. Now that God destroyed the second temple, we're ready for the third temple, which will have a greater revelation. So my eyes are looking at the essence of it all. And in a way, that's the way sometimes God exercises his love too. But I think it's very much connected, to what we're speaking about, that even in destruction, there's construction. Even in ashes, there's the fire of God.
Rabbi, you talk about the fact that every place is holy. Where you are right now is holy. Mm-hmm. And when people start looking at a place as holier than where they are right now, isn't that wrong? I mean, if I think I can only pray at the temple or when I have a rabbi, then there's a problem.
So that's an excellent question. So you're asking basically, so then why do we need a temple? What's the idea?
Community, but when you start looking at the temple as the only holy place you can go to pray, then that would be different.
No, you're right. So there's two things, right? So there's our purpose of making every place the holiest place in the world. And every place is potentially holy because it depends on whether we will infuse it with holiness or not, and treat it as the holiest place in the world or not. So every place is potentially holy. There is a place that doesn't depend on us or on our work, and that's Jerusalem. It's holy. Why? Because God chose it as holy. The temple is holy because God chose it as his home. Now, that's a different type of holiness. It's not a holiness that's conditioned on the human work in this world, but it's unconditional. It's there just because God wanted that to be his home. So that's the holiness that we refer to when we speak about Jerusalem and the temple. Now you're right. It doesn't take away from our duty to make every place holy and to be in the moment, so much so that we infuse every moment with true divinity. I'll share with you a personal story. As many of you know, I'm very connected to the late Lubavitcher Rebbe, Rabbi Schneerson. And not too long ago, maybe 8 months ago, I had this burning desire to go and pray at his gravesite. And then I couldn't. I had too many things happening here, so I decided to stay. And I was a little torn. And that night I had a dream with the Lubavitcher Rebbe. As if, and I'm not going to share the content of the dream, but it's, to me, that shared exactly the idea you're speaking about, Vicky. And that is that, we think that sometimes holiness is there and that we have to go there in order to connect. But the holiness is here, and the Rebbe came to me here. I didn't have to go to him there. I decided to stay and do my work, and that's where holiness is found. It's reminiscent of the, Rabbi Steinsaltz had a great Hasidic Rebbe in his lineage, Rabbi Yitzchak Ovorke. Rabbi Yitzchak Ovorke, I think, is his great-great-great-grandfather. But he came from Poland, and he was a very special man, a holy man, of course, but he tells the story. It's a story that's become famous. It's part of the folklore of Jewish stories and tales. But it's a story about how a man from some village in Poland, a guy named Yankel, once had a dream that under the bridge in a very specific place in Prague, there was a great treasure. He had this dream once, twice, and then 3 times. He decided, that's it. I'm sick and tired of being poor. I'm going to travel to Prague and dig exactly at the place that I saw in the dream and get that treasure and become rich. So he traveled to Prague. He went to that exact location, found the bridge, found the place in the ground where he needed to dig. He started digging, and all of a sudden a policeman comes to him and says, hey, what are you doing? He says, I'm digging. He says, well, you're not allowed to dig here. He says, what, I had a dream. He says, well, what dream? He says, well, I'm Yanko from Poland and from this and this place in Poland. And this dream came to me 3 times. And apparently going in my dream, there's a treasure here. So I decided to dig. And the policeman says, what are you doing here? It's amazing because I had a dream that came to me 3 times that there's a Yanko in the place that you said you live in Poland that has a treasure where right beneath his oven in his home. Yankel heard that. He said, I can't believe it. So he runs back home, goes to his oven, digs behind his oven, and finds a treasure. That's the story Rabbi Yitzchak Avorket teaches, shares. But the story, I think, it conveys exactly this message. Sometimes we think that treasures are out there, somewhere in Prague, somewhere in La La Land, but they are really under our ovens. That's where divinity really lies. That's where holiness has the potential to be created more than in any other place. Yeah. Okay. Any other comment, question? Otherwise, we can continue. Fine. Okay, so let's continue here at the bottom of page 90. Instead, the tradition developed. Does anyone want to read? Anyone?
I can read.
Please, Vicky, thank you.
Instead, the tradition developed the whole order of mitzvot, which may seem as a stylization of a system of pictures and symbols using the body and mind of man. For in a certain sense, the mitzvot in all their minutiae, constitute an endless moving series of images depicting a vision of supreme revelation. These images are expressed in the objective actions, but are not to be identified with them. And if the action is a correct action in terms of the original revelation, then it will have a significance within other systems of reality. Thus, precisely because the whole world is so full of symbols and meanings, pictures and forms, there is a repudiation of any attempt to make any one special image, for the existing reality is itself so entirely made up of and by one single organized picture.
Right. Okay, so powerful words, and of course we can chew them for a very long time. But Rabbi Steinsaltz, I think here is speaking to a paradox that really exists in human life and maybe even in the human condition. Because on the one hand, we are told, like we just said, that God is limitless. On the other hand, life is full of pictures, full of limits, full of definitions. Even the mitzvahs themselves that we do have very strict definitions, right? When I give tzedakah, I gave a very specific amount with a specific symbol, a specific image to a poor person. When I put on tefillin, again, it's a very specific type of animal skin. It's a very specific type of way that I put on tefillin. So you have this paradox in human life and in the human condition. On the one hand, we are told that yes, we are limitless. On the other hand, there's still imagery that we find in our lives. And how do we therefore solve this paradox? And Rabbi Steinsaltz is saying here, and I think this is the key sentence, that these images are expressed in the objective actions, but are not to be identified with them. In other words, yes, because we live in this world, we have to speak with the language of this world, which is a language of limits. But we can't allow this language of the world to define the essence of the world, to define God himself. I would say, going back to the temple, I think it's fascinating that we keep going back to this. Maybe it's by maybe it's God's way of saying the temple is coming soon. Mashiach is coming soon. But if we go to the ark itself that we were speaking about before, it's fascinating. I think we mentioned this paradox in the past. But on the one hand, the ark had its very specific measurements. Amatayim v'chetzi orko, 2.5 amma was its length. V'ama v'chetzi rachbo, 1.5 amma was its width. God instructed Moses and all people who would to build the ark to come how to build it with exact measurements. Now, the ark had its own measurements. The Holy of Holies also had its own measurements. The Holy of Holies also had to be built in a very specific and defined way. When you took the ark that had its own measurements and put it in the Holy of Holies, really, if you think about this architecturally, mathematically, it should have not fit. Why? Because the ark really had greater measurements than the Holy of Holies. But lo and behold, it fit. It fit in the first temple. It fit in the second temple. It fit in the tabernacle in the desert. It fit. How could it be? It doesn't fit. The measurements of the ark, it's impossible to put it in. It's like, trying to push a couch through a door that just doesn't fit. If you've moved homes, you know what I'm talking about. It doesn't fit. But in the Holy of Holies, it fit. Why? Because God wanted to make exactly this point at what is considered to be the heart of the world. The very core of the world was the Holy of Holies. That's the root of the world, so to speak. What point was he making? That this is the way the world is going to be created. The heart is like this, and the rest of the world is like this. That on the one hand, we have measurements. On the other hand, don't let those measurements blind you or play with your mind. Those measurements are only reflective of the way the world is, but they are not the reflective of the essence of the world, of the way the world is at its very soul. We are a part of this world, and we live in this world, but we really belong to somewhere much, much higher, to a limitless place. And that's really what our fabric is made of. So the ark fit, but it didn't fit. Human beings fit in this world, but really we don't fit. We are within, but we're also stay above. Like Rabbi Steinsaltz often says, we might be in this world, but we're not of this world. That's not who we are. Who we are, again, essentially. We're much greater than that. And in a way, this is exactly what Rabbi Steinsaltz is saying here in this paragraph. But on the one hand, yes, we have images because that's the way the world is. There's nothing we can do about that. That's how the world functions, with numbers and with plans and with architectural designs and so on. But on the other hand, we can't allow those to give us this false idea that this is the only thing the world is made of. There's so much more to it. So pictures, yes, mitzvahs have pictures and images and definitions, but they don't represent the limitless soul that lies beneath each and every one of them. It's interesting because the word for, and the Kabbalah speaks a lot about this, but the word for world in Hebrew is olam. But the word olam also means to conceal, le'alim in Hebrew. It's still used le'talem or le'alim, to conceal. Why? Because yes, there is a world that we see and that we can touch and that we can feel and so on with our physical senses. But that world conceals something so much greater, conceals God himself. The olam, ma'alim, as they say, the world, it conceals the essence of it all. So we can't judge it just by the way it appears, but by what it really has essentially. We see that again in the actual Hebrew word for the world, for the word world, sorry. Olam le'alim. That's really the idea.
It almost seems like the quintessential difference between science and spirituality.
So go ahead and elaborate on that.
So science is an exactitude. Spirituality is not an exactitude. In fact, it's the antithesis of that. If you try to think of spirituality in a scientific perspective, you'll miss the essence of the spirituality.
Right. Excellent. Very good. In a way, yeah, you're right. You're right. Now, I will say this, that on the other hand, you know, they are a contradiction, but they can also harmonize beautifully together. But sometimes, as human beings, right, the only way we can really feel spirituality is through a very physical action, through science. And then if we float above science, then we almost divorce ourselves from the experience of holiness itself. So you're right. And that's exactly what the paradox is all about. Yeah. You know, it sounds very abstract and very mystical and very out there what we're speaking about. But I think we see that in human relationships a lot. And maybe it's very relevant to our day and age. That on the one hand, human relationships, yes, are defined by external features. You know, a beauty. And, you know, people fall in love because of many reasons, but one of them, certainly the physical beauty of someone else. You fall in love because of, or you have a relationship with someone, again, because of the frequency in which you can see them, the actual ability to see them. We couldn't see people actually with their physical bodies, as, you know, even like now, via Zoom. If we couldn't have this class via Zoom, will be a different class where we actually see each other. So on the one hand, we have this very strong physical component to every relationship. On the other hand, we all know that relationships are not based on those components. That real relationships also thrive, not only survive, but also thrive when the physical component is not there. I might not see a person for months and months and months and months. And I know, I'm sure you know that for your closest friends, for the people that are closest to you, that you might not see them for months and months and months and months, and maybe years and years and years and years. But when you actually see them, it's as if you were never apart. You were always there together, as if you lived life together side by side. Why? Because that intensity of the spiritual experience is not limited by the physical component in every relationship. That always exists in true friendships, in true relationships. So we see that this paradox is found also again in human relationships. And I say that I think it's very relevant to our day and age, because not only of the coronavirus have we not seen each other, and we have not had this physical type of relationship with many of our loved ones, but also we live in a world where we judge people because of their physical appearance, the color of their skin and so on. But therefore we dare not forget the spiritual component. And if we were to focus on the spiritual component, we will understand that really the physical component is not a paradox. It's quite the opposite. It's a vessel for that spiritual intensity in every relationship. Yeah. Okay, maybe a little bit more, but again, I'd love to hear from you. That's what learning is all about, a two-way street.
I'd like to add something that you just said as far as the physical and color of their skin, the way the eyes are, whatever, that make us so different. And yet God made us with all interchangeable parts because we're all part of the human race.
Right.
So, I mean, people don't even see that because they do see that exterior and judge people based on that. So you wonder whether or not people who are blind are really given a gift.
Mhm.
Yeah, you're right. Helen Keller famously said that to lose your sight is no big deal, but when you lose your vision, then you've lost it all.
Yeah.
Yeah, you're right. Very good. Very well said. You know, I have a friend that's a poet, and he sent me a beautiful poem yesterday that he had just written. And it speaks to the word that you just mentioned. If I can find it, here it is. It's called apart. And he has a play of word with the word apart. So he says, so close, so far. From apart, a part of a seam, apart from a dream, apart from the start, a part of the heart. You know, the word apart is a beautiful poem because the word apart, I mean, I'm either separate or I'm actually a part of you. And it's our choice, really, to decide whether we will relate to each other as people that are apart of one another or a part of one another?
Rabbi,
Way to look at
Go ahead, Barry. No, go ahead.
Rabbi, I just want to share something really quickly with you.
Yeah.
When I was in a very bad, stressed out position a few weeks ago, having a lot of trouble sleeping, I picked up my iPad and got a YouTube video of Shmuel playing his flute, having come from the Soul Conference and remembering how that so positively affected me. And I wanted you to know that that was like a lifeline. But the whole synagogue is a lifeline. But that connection, which was so powerful, so relaxing, allowed me to fall asleep. I don't know how else to describe the significance of what I'm saying to what we're learning today.
Thank you, Barry. Thank you. I mean, I have goosebumps. Your words move me deeply. I'll share that with Shmuel too. Thank you, really. Thank you. Beautiful. Very nice. Gila, did you want to say something too?
Yeah, just something quick. So when we find people that we connect with spiritually, we call them soulmates, or, we have different terminology to describe a closeness or a connection to certain people. And after a while, as you said, we don't really see them anymore. We feel them. Right. One of my kids, when he was very, very young, I think he was maybe 3 years old, and I was tucking him in to bed, and he said, and we were singing different songs about God, about Hashem is here, Hashem is there, right. Children's songs and things like that. And he said, Mommy, can I see God? Like, where is God? And I said, no, you can't really see God, but you can feel God. And on the most simplistic level, I think doesn't it carry over when we really make a connection with people, with certain people? It's really our neshamas that take over.
No doubt, no doubt. Beautifully put, really beautiful. And maybe we'll conclude with that story, because I've heard it from Rabbi Steinsaltz many times. And I will say each time I heard it from him, he would cry, literally cry. His eyes would swell with tears. But he tells the story of his of his son, who was once approached for counseling by these parents who had 2 children, a boy and a girl, and they would fight all the time. The boy was older and he would bully his sister all the time, and they kept them separate apart in 2 separate rooms. And one day they felt that, it's time for their children to become closer to one another. They said, you know what, tonight you'll sleep in the same room. We're changing the design of the house. Tonight you'll sleep in the same room. And this is these parents telling the story to the son of Rabbi Steinsaltz, and then told Rabbi Steinsaltz the story. And again, each time Rabbi Steinsaltz says the story, he cries. But so that night they put them in the same room. But of course, as anxious parents, they stayed by the door to see what would happen. Is the boy going to beat his sister up now that they're in the same room or not? Anyway, they're in bed. They said good night. They left the room, and then they stayed by the door. And then the boy gets out of his bed, approaches his sister's bed, and they're like getting all ready to enter the room. But they said, let's just see what happens. And then they see the boy going to the girl and saying to the little girl, who was maybe 4 or 5 years old, and he was maybe 7 years old. He says to the girl, can I ask you a question? To his sister. Says, yes. Says, can you teach me how to speak to God, because I've already forgotten.
Wow.
And a true story. But you see, children have that. Children sense God in everything. The younger you are, the closer you are to God, so to speak, the more you are able to sense God. You have nothing obstructing you. And this boy realized that he had just forgotten how to speak to God, but he also realized that his 4-year-old innocent sister surely knows how to. So can you teach me how to speak to him? Because I certainly have forgotten. I've forgotten. And Really, the goal of life is to come back to those earliest memories and to reignite them, to reawaken them, so that we can learn how to speak to God again. And not just how to speak to God, but also, as mentioned, how to see God, that limitless God, in everything, in every moment, and in every person.